The spirit of innovation is mostly positive. After all, innovation leaps humanity forward. The wheel enabled transportation, space exploration led to the internet, and the smartphone has connected the world. These are just some examples. The innovation wheel keeps turning, there's no doubt about that. But for our brief history of breakthrough innovation, we've rarely had to discuss or think about the ethics behind those efforts, like we do with the next breakthrough, artificial intelligence and machine learning. AI and ML are widely considered to be the tools that will leap humanity forward into the future. But there's a catch. Who decides the ethics of AI and ML? Who tells the computer how it should think? What should the computer value? What is ethical? And at what point have we gone too far?
This technology is not fully developed. There are a lot of risks associated with it, and there are no regulations. So we don't know all of the consequences of using this technology.
When we think about innovation, we think about all the good that will come from it, and rarely think about the consequences that innovation leaves in its wake. Someone is thinking about that though, and that someone is Bina Amanath. As the executive director of Deloitte's Global AI Institute, it's her job to go through all the what-ifs of AI. On this episode of IT Visionaries, Bina explains how she weighs all the outcomes, and she discusses the 3 paths companies are currently pursuing to get to ethical AI. She also talks about why trustworthy AI and machine learning will be the secret to all successful technology breakthroughs. Enjoy.
IT Visionaries is created by the team at mission.org and brought to you by Salesforce Platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Innovate fast, empower every employee, and scale with confidence from anywhere, with a customer at the center of everything you do. Learn more at salesforce.com/platform.
Welcome everyone to another episode of IT Visionaries, and today we have the executive director of the Global Deloitte AI Institute and AI Ethics, Bina Amanath. Bina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Albert. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Tell our audience what it is you do with AI for Deloitte, and we're going to definitely dive into the idea of the ethics behind it, because that is going to be super interesting. But I'd love for you to share with our audience exactly your role.
Awesome. So, I play 2 key roles. The first one is I lead our Global Deloitte AI Institute, which is really connecting all the possible dimensions of applied AI. So, Albert, I've been at Deloitte for almost 2 years now, but I come from the industry, or, my prior life has all been in building out AI and data products and solutions and taking it to market. And what I've seen was a challenge was also, as AI started becoming real, there's a lot happening in the AI space, right? Even when I'm building an AI product or it's solving for a specific business problem, say supply chain optimization or predicting machine failure, I know the problem statement as a business. What I didn't know is what is the fastest way to get to that solution, right? Because there are startups in the mix, there is research happening from academia in the mix, there are mature AI products, there are regulations happening. So how do you bring all these dimensions to the table for solving specific applied AI problems, business problems? That's what we do under the Deloitte AI Institute. We very much focus on the applied AI lens and bring in the different dimensions. I also lead our AI ethics initiative, which is really where we call it trustworthy AI, because we believe that trust has to be at the center. And then you have to think about ethics from the lens of how do you get trust within AI solutions that we're building. There are different dimensions to it, I know you want to deep dive into it, so I'll hold off on going at length into that aspect.
Yeah, so just so our audience has a framework, I'm checking out your LinkedIn. You've been held VP level and higher roles in AI, data science. So we're not just talking about someone who is, because how a lot of startups say they have AI, and you dive in deep, you find out that they don't have that much AI. But you've been a part of this for quite a bit of time, including acting as and serving as the CTO for artificial intelligence at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. It sounds like you've been in the Dean of Engineering at Cal Poly for this, and you also are the founder of Humans for AI. So you have extensive experience. One of the things that we always hear about in AI is the idea, and this is like a pervasive thing, right? Can AI go awry? And I think that's where the ethics part of it is really interesting. The other thing I want to dive into and hear your perspective is when we talk to people who build AI-based algorithms that try to figure out AI-based solutions, and if you ask a single engineer on those projects, like what is the outcome of this data input? A lot of times they'll say like they don't know. Like for example, in the movie The Social Dilemma, people are like, does anyone really know how Facebook figures out what content to show you anymore? And it's like, this might be lost. Like the AI is figuring everything out, right? And so because we know that AI, from someone who's not too familiar with it, maybe just from reading articles, we know that it is self-learning. It is taking data inputs and impacting and optimizing for something. There's always that fear that things can go awry. I'd love for you to dive into like, is that a logical fear? It sounds like, you guys are already putting limits on it with AI for ethics, but I'd love to hear your perspective on where AI is going and, how helpful, how dangerous it could be. Like I know so many subjects. That wasn't even really a question. I just gave you like a preamble. So let's start there.
Albert, I was going to say, there is so much to unpack in what you just said. I could go in so many different directions. No, but, all great points that you bring up, right? Maybe I'll start with a little bit about my background because I was not the dean of engineering. I sit on the advisory board, the industrial advisory board for the dean of engineering at Cal Poly School of Engineering. And what that means is really bringing in the industry lens and to help shape curriculum, right? Because this technology is evolving so rapidly.
Right.
So we bring in, where's the industry heading and what should we be teaching our students so that we're preparing for the next future generation. So yeah, I do have a broad array of experience. Maybe I'll start with a little bit about my background, Albert.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, look, I did the traditional path of, I have a bachelor's and master's in computer science and an MBA in finance and, really, stuck to the data space, right? I'm going to totally date myself, but I've actually programmed on assembly language and COBOL and, languages that have become outdated now. But even at that time, we did learn AI in theory, right? But it was really theory. There was not much we could do. This was early 90s. There was not much we could do because we didn't have access to the compute or massive amounts of data. So it was more, imaginary applications of AI. And I feel so fortunate to have lived during this time when things that we could just imagine is becoming real. So my career journey has been, always anchored in data and then evolving it to, then came the big, from transactional move to business intelligence. Remember that a few decades ago, it was a cool thing, business intelligence and data warehousing.
Yeah.
When we started looking at data to, actually drive financial reports, right? That was a big deal. You may not remember it, but I remember there was a lot of angst on, how is this different? Why do we need a separate data construct? What is this helping us do, right? And then came, once big data and compute power took off, then came machine learning and data science and AI and kind of going through that cultural shift. From a work perspective, my background, having worked in telecom and financial services, banks, trading, manufacturing, field services, I think, I've been very fortunate to anchor myself on data and see this evolution firsthand. And naturally grew through my career, as I started from hands-on coding to management and then leading large initiatives and taking products to market. What I've seen is, it's an interesting era. If you take a step back, we are living in this time where, there are three parallel streams. Think of the first stream as a core research in AI and data, the core technologies, whether it is deep learning or neural network. That is still shaping and that's still evolving. That's happening in research groups and research teams, in academia with PhD students, right? That's a core research that's happening. Then there is a second stream, which is also evolving, taking that, core technology and applying it in the real world across industries, across functions, right? So think of it, you're still building the engine for the car, but in parallel, you are also building the car and trying to drive it. Right. So that's, the second stream. And then the third stream is really what you were touching a little bit on is all the consequences of using the technology. In the second stream, we purely focus on the value creation from AI, right? We are thinking of how can this optimize my supply chain? How can this help with sourcing? How can this help provide more personalized marketing, right? It's very focused on value creation. But, in addition to the value creation, there are negative impacts that could happen because, that's why this first stream is important. This technology is not fully developed. It's not in an end state. So, we don't know all of the consequences of using this technology, which could be right from, impact to health, addiction, the social impacts to it, right? And so, there are a lot of risks associated with it, and there are no regulations. So, sticking to that example, the speed limits have not yet been defined because we don't know, what are all the possible consequences. So, one key step as we think about this, this broader framing, right, about these three parallel streams, I think a lot about that third stream because I do think we need to be talking about risk and ethics and thinking about how do we put these guardrails in place so that we can innovate faster, so that we can keep getting value, but at the same time, we're mitigating the negative things that could come out of this technology. So I've shared a lot as well.
Yeah.
Where do you want to go deeper into?
Yeah, let's start with the good stuff because I think the good stuff is always the most important thing because I agree with you. The spirit of innovation typically is positive. Most people don't have a negative spirit of innovation, right? They want to solve actual problems. And so I've heard some really amazing use cases of AI being better able to identify, let's say, like did a little research on AI being better able to detect health outcomes, spot cancer earlier, more accurate than a human eye, more sophisticated, faster processing speed to come back with a conclusion that says, hey, your health is in dire need of help, or identifying, hey, this is benign, it's not a problem. And then we hear some of the other use cases that are transferring in business, being able smarter. Like I know like certain companies you mentioned supply chain, right? Changing the way things are made without requiring human input to say like, hey, listen, just route the products from A to B. Instead of from A to B, let's go ACB because it's going to be faster because of whatever reasons.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to share some of these really cool stories of like how it's benefiting businesses right now. Like, because, a lot of times when we hear about AI, we think about a future state, but it's here. It's already here and it's already positively impacting companies and outcomes. So I'd love for you to share some of these anecdotal stories. So, I always love hearing the stories because I think when you're hearing it for the first time, when you hear about AI, you think it's a future state. But then when you hear what's actually happening, it's like, wow, we're closer to the future than we really think.
Yes. I can tell you, I sat in a classroom in, I'm not going to say the year, but imagine, we'll see personalized marketing, right? I remember this sitting and talking about, won't it be great if we go for a movie and it shows, trailers that is appealing to me. And it was such a future state, Albert, that we couldn't even, imagine it becoming real. And look at this, 30 years later, it's happening. So I think, the other part is also to what you said, it's easier to relate to AI from a personalized marketing and personalized offer perspective, which I think most people get. That's where, AI is being used. Personalized, whether it's serving personalized content or personalized ads, that is really something that's happening. What we don't hear is looking at, these nitty-gritty problems on the traditional and very old industries like industrial companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll share an example of an aviation company that manufactures jet engines. We were looking at data from the so-called black box that we've all heard about from jet engine and seeing how do you actually use that data and tie it in with service records to predict engine failure so that you could prevent unplanned downtime and by proactively sending a field service engineer, right? So no more flight delays or no more missed flights when we start flying again. But, it was one of those where, data and AI machine learning was being used in a use case, which is where it's a very old industry, right? So look, and that can extend to pretty much any equipment that you look at, right? Whether it is a jet engine or the railway engine or the MRI machine, the X-ray machine, right? All of these equipments now with sensors and with IoT have started gathering data, which is driving insights and making those machines smarter. So that's one cool use case that I've seen. The other one is really where we are able to engage with customers in a better way, right? Like this conversation itself, Albert, could have been in two different languages. Like I could be speaking in a different language, you could be speaking in a different language, but there is live translation happening, where you can actually read and communicate, right? There are tools that exist, like, we take things like translate and maps for granted. But I remember a time when, you had to look at the AAA maps to figure out the optimal path, right? And now, you just take those. And all of this is using AI at its core, right? It's really about looking at data and optimizing the paths for you, finding out the translations real time. So, these are just some of those examples. I was also going to give you an example of, trying to engage with customers better, not just through personalized marketing and personalized ads, but also, we are using technologies like chatbot, which can engage with you and take care of rudimentary things. If you use your app on the phone for your banking, right? That has become so smooth. You don't even need to go to an ATM machine, right? You can deposit a check, you can check your balance, you can do so much over the phone. And at its core, it's AI, because that data is being captured to do these routine work. But you could have a real conversation with the banker when you need that human touch and when you need advice. So, across all industries, AI is being used in different levels. And even it's across all functions, not just within marketing.
That example you just gave about instant live translations, I actually got to experience that firsthand. Just a year ago, I went on a trip to Taiwan before everything shut down. And I remember my friend saying like, "Oh, you have a Google phone?" I was like, "Ed, you can, because I was reading a menu. I was trying to read a menu and trying to like practice my Chinese. And my friend's like, "Why are you even doing that?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He just took a picture of the menu and it translated it for him. I was like,
"Yeah, I know." And
which I was blown away.
I remember, my trip to China, and I don't understand anything besides Ni Hao Ma and Xie Xie.
Yep. How are you? Thank you.
But we loved doing local things, and we were going to Chinese stores where everything was labeled Chinese, and we were just using our phone and an app to translate it live, and even getting like what ingredients are in it, right? So that technology is very powerful. It's also surprising, isn't it, that we take those things for granted now?
Yeah.
It's expected. Oh, yeah, of course, we should be able to translate it. Why not?
Well, the thing is, to the consumer perspective, right? So if I don't know too much about programming, for the consumer perspective, the AI curve probably feels a little slow. Because when, we think about like when chatbots first started making a lot of adoption, let's say 2015, 16, I remember AI chatbots were all the rage.
Yes.
But like, it was frustrating because you would say, "What's your order number?" And you type it in like, "I don't know what you mean." It's like, "What would you like to do?" It's like, "Tell me where it is." And they'd be like, "I don't know what you mean. Can you type it in?" And it was a little frustrating. And I remember because I worked at a software company that was trying to develop an algorithm that could identify objects for marketing in creative. So the idea was that if I was, let's say, a, world-renowned soda company, and I wanted pictures of people drinking the soda at a ball game, that I could just type that in. It would bring me back all the pictures like that. But it was quite hard to program. It would constantly not work. And not because of anything the engineers were doing wrong, but it just didn't, like you said, it didn't have enough data inputs to truly know what was a ball game versus what was not a ball game. Or like across enough sports, like you would program a ball, but let's say a hockey puck doesn't look like a ball. So it'd be like, this isn't a game. Like, no, it is a game.
Yeah, so true.
And so there's kind of like the AI itself has a learning curve where I think when customers first hear the word AI, they think it should do everything. But in reality, it takes a while before it gathers enough data to figure something out. Talk to us a little bit about like how that actually works. What are you starting to see? Like, at how many data points does an AI start becoming more accurate? Is there like a number? Do you need to, for example, it needs 10 million data points or something like that before it becomes accurate? I'd love to hear your perspective on how AI, what it takes to develop AI today versus, 5 years ago.
It just gets better. So I'll give you this jet engine example because I absolutely love it. When we started looking at the jet engine, it was one of those which was originally, started getting manufactured in the 50s. And there were about 32 data points that were captured, right? But what happened is, once we started going down this path, the company realized, you need to capture more data. And so this was 32 data points being captured during 3 times in a flight: takeoff, climb, and landing, right? So there were 3 time periods, right? But the newer engines, they started equipping with more sensors and more frequency for capturing data. So to give you a sense of it, it was capturing about 32,000 data points in the newer jet engines, 32,000 data points at the rate of 1/16th per second. So the volume of data was just insane. The amount of data that was being captured to be able to fine tune the model over time and improve its performance.
So that's 32,000 times 16 was the actual number of data points captured per second, whereas before you mentioned 32 data points 3 times in a flight, so 96 total data points on a flight.
Yeah, so you can imagine the massive amounts of data that was being captured, but it helps fine tune the model. Now, this is one of those, IoT specific examples, but think about even chatbots, right? I remember the first time when the voice recognition systems rolled out, it didn't recognize my so-called Indian, British, American accent, right? There is no way, it would recognize it, but it's training. And that's why the big thing that we're using with AI today is that the underlying technology is machine learning, right? And
that's right.
It learns over time and it improves, right? Think of it as a child. The first time it's out there interacting with you, it is still trying to, it has been trained on some data sets, but it's getting the feedback and learning and improving over time. And if you think about just chatbots as an example, that framing of having these 3 parallel streams, the core technology of chatbot has also evolved, right? It's evolved to not only take voice, but it's evolved to have, the concept of digital humans, where you have a human image actually interacting with you. It's also evolved to that phase where you're using that same technology besides customer interaction to capture memories, right? I was recently reading an article where William Shatner, our Star Trek Captain Trek, is using that technology to preserve his memory, right? Where he's giving an interview and it's tailored after him. But think about all the possible ways that this technology can be used, besides in the business world, but also in the personal side, right? And now I think as more and more people are using AI and these technologies, they are learning how to train it better, because most people have intuitively figured out that the more you interact with it, the more better it gets. And I think you're definitely seeing that happening in the real world as well. But that's where also the bad actors have figured out that you can train it to be misused, right? So you see both sides of it.
Yeah, I mean, your point is exactly right. I remember when the iPhone X first came out with Face Unlock, and there was a big, it was kind of comical. I laugh about it, but in the Asian community, that it didn't work because everyone could unlock everyone else's phone in the Asian community. Like they had nothing figured out, the differences between the Asian faces.
Yeah.
Which is comical then, but they figured it out now. But it's one of those use cases where maybe you don't realize until because you're actively programming it, you don't know. But talk a little bit about that. Like what goes into programming these algorithms? So artificial intelligence is typically, people like to say it's an algorithm, but it's usually not just one thing. It's like a huge code base that's astronomical, and most engineers are only working on a piece of it.
Yeah.
But talk about how you mentioned, like you have to teach it, like you have to teach the AI, and which is crazy and that's where it gets into what I was talking about, my preamble, which is, there's a lot of companies now, they have artificial intelligence helping their customers and get better services, but they actually don't know like what decisions it'll make, which is crazy. Like they can't quantifiably tell you like it'll do this every single time because it won't. It evaluates too many factors. Talk a little about what it takes to program in AI and what that means for us in going forward.
Yeah, there is a notion that it's like a magic box that you throw massive amounts of data and it will just, throw insights, right? That's something that you hear very commonly. But really, it is about the best way for me to talk about it is to start with you want to start with the business problem. Mm-hmm. I hear too often I have this massive amount of data. What can AI do for me? I'm like, no, let's start with what are some of the key business problems that you have, and let's try to work backwards. And so if you think about, that jet engine failure, right? We knew it was about predicting flight, unplanned downtime so that there was no flight delay. Then you work backwards and figure out what kind of data is needed to be able to predict. What do we have in-house right now that we can use to train the model on so that it can show you some of the correlation, which can then drive to say, these are the parameters. When it reaches this threshold, usually there is a failure. So let's see where it is at today. And then you can predict that failure, send a field, so there's an action following up. So working backwards, identifying the right data set and additional data sets that might be needed to actually come up with the insight. That's the first step, but that's literally the first step, Albert, because during the data discovery, you might find correlations that you had not anticipated, which could also lead to other solutions. But once you have that algorithm built out, then it needs to go through the whole process of putting it into production, which is very similar to what happens in the software world with DevOps. Like now the whole notion of ML ops is coming because machine learning continues to learn and evolve. Unlike the traditional software of 20 years ago, if you put out a program that performed consistently and did the same, ran the same formula every time, here that formula is evolving based on the data that is being fed. So it is no longer about a fixed set of code giving you a fixed answer every single time. So running it through the production process, deploying it into production, and then continuously watching its behavior, because that software is still evolving. The answers are going to change based on the data that you feed it. And we've seen enough examples of it. So, going back to your baseball example, right? If you start feeding it with, say, pizza, right? Pizza images, tagging it as the ball, over time, it is going to train itself to recognize a pizza as a ball and then tag those as baseball games.
Yeah.
I think the simplest way to describe it, it's about teaching a child, right? When a child is born, you teach that child how to eat, right? You're continuously teaching whether you eat with a spoon or fork or with your hands or chopsticks, right? You learn it during your childhood because that's your learning phase and you're continuously evolving. Like I didn't grow up learning to eat with chopsticks, but over time, you train yourself because, maybe you're in that situation, right? So I think the best way to think about it is, you're feeding in data to teach the algorithm to take its first pass, but it's continuing to learn even while it's out in production.
What about on the other side of it, which is us as consumers, or if I'm an enterprise, I'm the consumer of the AI. How is the acceptance of it? Because your point about, let's use maintenance, equipment maintenance. I think that's a really great example because for the most part and through the history of time, most people fix their machines when they broke. That was the first time you addressed the machine. Like, oh, it's not working. If you think about us with our cars today, we're a lot like that, right? If the light goes on, something's wrong, we take it in the shop. I mean, outside of oil changes, people don't really do preventative maintenance. Like even when it comes to like tire maintenance, most consumers of vehicles, the first time they go get their tires fixed is because like the inspection tells them, hey, you're out of code. Like you're actually on dangerous tires. And like, oh, geez, I didn't realize that. Yeah. Most people don't realize until there's some type of warning. And so if you've been in an industry, let's say I've been in a manufacturing or jet engine industry and I've been there for like 30 years, most of the time, maybe I didn't really think something was wrong till I got a code or a light that told me something was wrong. But now you're preventatively telling me that, hey, this is about to go out.
Yes.
Are they willing to accept that, or how has the acceptance of this information been?
Yeah, no, that is the crux of the matter. Like you can have the most 99.9999% accurate model that is predicting, but if nobody uses it, it's a failed project. And one of the projects that that I've worked on was being able to predict the failure of a factory floor machine. Mm-hmm. And now here it is not just a regular consumer. These are factory floor workers who have been doing this job. It's in their it's in their instinct. They just feel that they have that intuition, right? We put out this amazing AI solution which would predict when a machine might fail, which was on the bottleneck path. And, it was very accurate, but nobody used it because it was not in the culture of that, the manufacturing plant to really trust a machine. And at that point, we realized that, look, it's a failed AI project because if nobody uses it, then you cannot really say this was a great model. So what we had to do is, really think about how do you drive that adoption, right? Any new technology, there needs to be adoption of that technology for it to be successful. And AI especially so because it needs that feedback loop. And we had to actually look at, for me personally, it was also the time of realization that you need to think about UX and design and, adoption up front and not just focus on the technology. You need to think about where is this technology being deployed? Who is going to be using it? How do we make sure they engage and use it? So driving adoption, the design thinking behind it is super important. Thinking about the end user up front is super important. The way we solve for it is actually by through gamification. We started giving points to workers who actually gave feedback and followed the instructions, because that was the only way to improve the AI. So you gave points which they could redeem for small things, which kind of led to the adoption. So you have to get creative on how do you drive adoption and that mindset change, because you're absolutely right. You cannot just throw technology over the fence and expect the users to use it unless they're teenagers. My teenager sons will take anything and run with it. But in the enterprise world, you absolutely have to think about the end users and how is it relevant for them, their job, and make that a key priority of the project.
What was the outcome after? It sounds like it was like almost like a split test, right? One group gets gamified, the other group doesn't. What was an outcome from the test?
It was great. I mean, everybody likes earning points, right? So I think as soon as we turned on gamification and started assigning points, the adoption just went up. And that strategy actually has worked in some other cases as well. Like this was just one, but I think gamification, this was when we were looking at delivery paths, and the drivers kind of know that their preferred delivery path, right? When the algorithm started recommending a better delivery path based on the traffic and which would be optimal, they were not really adopting it. But giving them points to accept the path or to give a comment on why they were not taking it actually drove to more adoption. So I think gamification and giving points usually helps. And I haven't seen a scenario yet where points haven't worked.
I like that. We're all just kids at heart. How about the actual business outcomes? Like did the drivers that were relying on the AI, did they notice, for example, maybe they spent less time on the road, they were less fatigued because they have less time in traffic? I didn't know if there were any outcomes like that.
As enterprises, we're very good at defining the expected business outcomes upfront, right? We will see less fuel usage, less fatigue, less delays. Those are easier to define, and we usually define those before starting the AI project, and we definitely were able to track for it. But it usually takes a bump, and in the beginning there is no outcome, and then you go on to the actual outcome that was defined, and you see some unexpected ones too. I'll give you another example, and I'm happy to give you other, but since we are on the theme of this jet engine, I'll just stick to it. This one was looking at, going back to that example of the predicting jet engine failure. You could actually see correlations where you could see how the pilot was flying the plane. Were they actually following the training or the code that was provided to them? Were they hitting with the right amount of force, or were they accelerating too fast, right? Which in turn caused engine deterioration, which in turn, caused more engine failure, right? Were they actually doing what they were trained to do, or were they, exceeding some of those, right? So we hit one of those points where, you could see pilot performance compared to their training. And obviously the airline wanted that data so that it could, be a feedback for their performance review, which was not the original intent of the problem we were trying to solve, right? So, we had to go, and this is one of those, that third stream of thinking about the risks and unintended consequences on, what do we do with this data? What do we do with the correlation that we found? Because we don't want that performance review to be necessarily impacted, but at the same time, there needs to be a change. What we said is we would give you the aggregated, findings. And what the airline company actually went back and did was change their training so that, it was more easily understandable, and drive more frequent trainings to actually make sure that, the pilots were adhering to the training that was provided.
Interesting. So it was evaluating their actual behavior, their input. So what started as let's monitor jet engine failure turned into like, we can actually tell when the pilots are not performing to whatever the protocol is.
Yeah, so you could find, when you're going through the data discovery phase, you do find correlations, which can lead to other AI side projects, right? So you have to stay focused on the outcome you're trying to drive, and keep this more on the pipeline. Just like you could find additional correlations when you go through this phase, you might also find this data just doesn't give you any insights, right? There is zero correlation here, right? So I think you see both. It's not like just because you have massive amount of data that you'll be able to find insights and drive a business outcome.
There you go. I like that. It could be null results. Everyone expects a result. It's like, well, you might find there's nothing.
Yeah.
But and let's talk about that final topic. Is I think we can all agree that AI is, the spirit of it is to help benefit lives, benefit business. Whether you're using it in the enterprise world, the medical world, the personal world, we want better outcomes. We want faster outcomes. We want to get to results and resolutions of any problem faster. I think we all agree there. But then there's this other idea, which is, because AI is something that, like you said, it's a child learning. Well, a child can be taught bad things too.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the number one fear that, doomsdayers have is that it'll teach itself that, the best way to solve this problem is to, like Terminator, eliminate people. They're, of course, those doomsdayers. Talk a little about where you sit in the ethics side of things, where it says, hey, because this is such a powerful thing, we have to control what goes in it because of these potential negative outcomes. Talk a little about that.
Yeah, I think one of the key factors is, that I say is, when you are looking at all the value that AI can create, irrespective of the project, right, that you're working on, or the solution or the outcome you want to drive, take a proactive step to think about what are all the ways this could go wrong. What are all the ways this could be trained by bad actors? What are all the ways this could be misused, right?
Mm-hmm.
So thinking proactively about the ways this could go wrong is a good start. The other big factor is that to think about, to bring in diversity into the teams that's designing, building, developing AI. And here is the reason, right? Hear a lot about bias. And one of the key factors is that we all are biased. As humans, what makes us unique is our biases, right? Otherwise, we would all be thinking alike and talking alike, and then, that's no fun, right? We are shaped by our biases, and biases are inherent to every human. But you don't want those biases to go into these algorithms that's been scaled out to all of humanity. No doubt, I think I'm an amazing person, but I also know I'm a biased. I don't want all of my biases to be coded and amplified out, right? So bringing in that diversity of thought is super important. And when I speak about diversity, there is gender diversity, racial diversity, but diversity of people from different educational backgrounds, different economic backgrounds, different geographic backgrounds. Those are so important to have embedded within AI for AI to be truly successful, right? And, one of the key factors to mitigate bias is to bring this diversity of thought. I'll give you an example, even beyond AI, for example, for an AI example, and I'll give you this one is a little bit, lighthearted because we've all heard of the, larger bias challenges. And this was a few years ago, there was a group of data scientists who built this algorithm. To your example of, identifying balls, they were looking at identifying shoes. And they provided different pictures of shoes and, flip-flops and shoes and sneakers. And, they built out this algorithm which could look at a picture and say whether it was a shoe or not a shoe. And it worked great, except when you showed women's high-heeled pumps, right? The shoes with high heels. It did not flag it as a shoe. Guess what? This was built by two male data scientists, and they had just not fed that data to the algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
I say this more in jest and as a lighthearted example, but think about it. If these are identifying, say, a mole on your arm, which could be cancerous, right? Have you trained on all the different skin colors? Have you trained on all the possible shapes depending on people's ethnicity? So being able to bring that diversity of thought can actually make AI robust. So I think, for me, ethics is super important for us to figure out. I have seen companies in two buckets. One is the ones who are more advanced in AI and are trying to play catch up and figuring out, okay, we have all these AI solutions, we have all these AI tools, what are the ethical implications of it? Let's mitigate it. Then there is the other ones which are early in their AI journey, who are saying, what are the possible ethical implications that could come up from the solutions that we're trying to build? Let's put the guardrails in place so that our AI and engineering teams can run faster and innovate faster, right? Here are the guidelines. Here are the ethical principles that we will agree upon as a company, and build out the guardrails first and then run fast. So you see two categories. And, I think I am super hopeful. I think the conversation on ethics has become a top priority topic. I do think there is a lot of noise on it, but at the same time, it's also raising a lot of awareness and it is helping us move this topic forward, right? So I don't think it's a Terminator scenario, Albert.
Yeah.
But, it could be if we don't all get to be part of the conversation and start making sure these guardrails are put in place.
Your whole point on like diversity of thought is key. I was just thinking about this recent story I was reading today about an accident that happened with Tesla turning on the autonomous driving or driverless feature, but there was actually no driver. The two people in the vehicle were in the passenger seat and then in the back seat. And so it brings up, like, to your point, like if you've not thought of it, then you haven't coded it. It doesn't know how to evaluate it. I'm sure Tesla and every automaker is now going to put in a feature that says like if there's no one in the driver's seat, or if the camera on the driver's seat shows that they're sleeping or not paying attention, it has to stop driverless or turn on an alarm or something to be like, hey, this can't work like that.
Yeah.
So that, because like you said, they haven't seen that use case, so it hasn't come up with there. One of the things about ethics, when we think about like AI, that's the number one use case I hear that people want to see come true, which is autonomous driving, right? The vehicle has to think and evaluate scenarios. And what we're learning is that the amount of information a human brain can process in a split second, like what's dangerous, what's not dangerous, is just really difficult to program. And I'm curious, you mentioned this, like, so like this is it's a little off topic, but it's also on topic. So like one of the things I have debates with people about is like, what should the car be programmed to value? The driver's life or the world around its life? It's a big ethical question, right? Because there are accidents. There's probably potential accidents where if it swerves, it threatens the driver. But like, for example, this is an insane example, but I want to talk about it. If you're driving and a deer crosses your path and you hit the deer, the insurance company would rather you hit the deer. Well, I mean, by rates, it would rather you hit the deer than drive off and cause an accident. Mm-hmm. It sounds insane, right? But it's saying like, hey, don't harm others.
Yeah.
A deer is not an other. It's like a value. The insurance company said like the deer is not an other. Because I know this because I've hit a deer before. It was terrible. But then I know someone who swerved and didn't hit a deer and hit another person. And that was like even worse. How should things be programmed? Should it value like my life or the world around me's life? I'm curious what you think.
I think, look, those are interesting questions. And that's why I was pointing out this overarching frame, right? There is no regulation, right? Ideally, there should be a regulation or a playbook, like this is what should be done, right? So it comes down to these individual companies. I know there's a lot of work happening in the policy and regulation space. So, hopefully we'll see some guidelines on it. But here is, to counteract that, let me give you an example, right, from the medical phase, right? All doctors are supposed to take a Hippocrates oath on, do no harm, right? Now, if that was really true, then they would never be able to perform surgery, because if you are, cutting open somebody's stomach, there is harm being caused to that skin, right? So you have to make that judgment, and that is, is this in the long run, is it better or is it worse? Because we all as humans, irrespective of the profession, will have to make those calls. The reality is specifically for AI or the self-driving car that you just described, there is no, not enough thought put into it. There is not enough, guidelines around it, right? But the precedent is there in other fields. We just have to look at history. We just have to learn from other fields. We have to bring that diversity of thought to actually move this conversation forward. Because what you may agree upon, what the insurance may agree upon, might be different than what I agree upon. And that's what you need as an industry. You need guidance, right? And that's a lot of work that I do under our Trustworthy AI and Deloitte AI Institute, is really try to connect the dots and bring this array of potential areas and what are the pros and cons of each, right? Because it's not going to be a one size fits all.
Well, Beena, I appreciate you joining us today on IT Visionaries and sharing your wisdom, your insight, your experience, and all the above when it comes to AI. But now it is time for the lightning round. The lightning round is brought to you by the Salesforce platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Beena, this is where we ask you questions not related to work to try to get to know you a little bit better.
Awesome.
You ready?
Let's go.
All right. So this is it's a little bit related to work, but not quite work. What is your dream state AI? Give me an example of when dream state AI is here. I'll use mine first. I say AI hasn't arrived until I can have my own Jarvis, like from Iron Man, because Jarvis figures out everything. Like,
Yeah.
arguably Tony Stark knows nothing. He just asked Jarvis a question, and like Jarvis is like, this is the answer.
Yes. Oh, yes. I love that. But I think that, we'll become too dependent and not use our brain power as much. Here is my dream state. And I have one dream state by every industry. I'll just give you one from healthcare. Or maybe I can give you two. But here is one, like if a patient, is at a doctor and gets detected by a rare form of a rare disease, there is a network of machines connected to each other and doctors connected to each other who can, traverse the entire database across the world and find, what cure has worked in another part of the world with a unique treatment and brings it back to this patient within 5 minutes of diagnosis and says, here is something that has worked in the past.
That's insane.
Everything is connected. Another example, there is we have this really icky problems, large complex problems around solving for poverty, human trafficking, climate change, cancer, right? There is no one solution for it. But, my vision is that AI can enable education for everybody in the world, like make everybody educated, literate, basic literacy, because I believe there is a 95-year-old grandmother somewhere in a remote village in Africa who has a solution for the cancer in her head, but she just hasn't been educated or literate enough that she can translate it into words that can actually be applied in the medical world. So driving education, driving more, healthcare treatments, I think those are my dream states for AI.
That's pretty powerful. That's better than my Jarvis. No, I feel selfish because I was asking for a personal assistant. Here you in Venus saving the world. I'm talking about a personal assistant. So we'll go with Venus dream state. That is phenomenal. You mentioned earlier that you traveled to China. Are you a world traveler yourself? Have you been around the world, or are you more of a homebody?
I love traveling for fun. I love traveling with my family because I have 2 teenager boys and it's a good time to bond. And, you see, we've been before COVID hit, we were actually on a mission to see all the, the wonders of the world. So,
oh, wow.
To China, to Rome, to Peru, to Paris. And, we were on a roll. We've seen the Taj Mahal. So we were, really trying to see the wonders of the world, get that done. But I love traveling.
So what's next then? Because I feel like, the travel passports are out. COVID, I don't know what's going on, but I feel like travel's about to open up. Where's the next place you need to go?
Egypt was next. So hopefully, we'll get there.
Well, Meena, I appreciate you joining us today on IT Visionaries. Thanks for sharing all your experience. And we look forward to sharing your knowledge and wisdom with all of our audience soon.
Albert, thank you so much for having me. This was such a fun conversation. Take care.
IT Visionaries is created by the team at mission.org and brought to you by the Salesforce Customer 360 platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Build connected experience, empower every employee, and deliver continuous innovation with the customer at the center of everything you do. Learn more at salesforce.com/platform.